Hi, welcome to ALC314 Week 9. We're going to talk about globalization in advertising. And we're going to think of the case of Nike. Now, a lot of this week is going to again look at branding, and it's going to help you with your final assignment, but also just get you into thinking about what branding has done in our culture. There's no question that the biggest brands have moved internationally. They move transnationally. They don't stop at borders. In fact, they embrace the idea that they can transform any individual national culture into something that is connected to that brand. And this is the interesting thing about what's happened with particular brands. So as I say, we're going to a little bit look at Nike, but I want you to do a lot of that on the discussion board. Here, I'm going to try to, if I can, try to think of what brand value is and how it's been enacted by companies like Nike. So brands are something that are actively made. They're not passively made, but they're also built on what you'll see in the Arvidsson reading talks about as immaterial labor. And this immaterial labor is not really something that is totally done by the corporation itself. The interesting thing about brands is it's actually done by the consumers. And that value change that we talked about a little bit about 2 weeks ago moved from brands being an asset worth 20% of a corporation to, in the years in the 2000s and now 2000 teens, into something between 70 and 80% of the assets of a corporation. Now that is a massive transformation, and what is being done is the organization of the value of the consumer and their investment, their social investment in that brand. To get us there, there are certain writers that come from a tradition in Italy actually that are called autonomous, Marxist autonomous, and they talk about this surplus, ethical surplus that's produced by a brand or produced by the new corporation, that they actually produce a community. Now where that community comes from, some would say the corporation produces that community, and the value is their capacity to hold that community together related to a brand. But others say it's actually the consumers themselves, that they're working very hard at making brands make sense. So what is brand management right now? Well, it's the moving and shepherding of that value that has produced some community kind of relationship and being partially produced by the consumer himself. Now, the best way to describe this weird production of what a brand is, it's not really producing anything, it's just producing some sort of immaterial sort of value, is its productive consumption. So productive consumption is that something about what we do with the various products that we have moves back and is claimed by the brand or the corporation itself. Now, think about that a little bit. And as you think about that, I want you to think about particular brands, whether it's Victoria's Secrets or UGG boots or McDonald's, or in our case, the idea of Nike. What is it doing that's kind of fundamentally changing the relationship, or at least thinking through this relationship of what we have with brands themselves? The key change, according to Arvidsson and some others who write in this critical consumer studies area, is that it's not that the brand is in total control by the corporation. They have to co-brand, because the consumer, in a sense, is the value that's added to the brand itself. So what Nike has done and what other corporations have done is that they create an environment that allows you to produce your life through the brand. Now you can think of McDonald's doing the same thing, having Ronald McDonald in a fun place, even a place where, as Arvidsson describes, people actually get rid of their garbage after they finish their meal. They do the work for the brand itself, and that becomes a kind of discipline within that environment, really fun discipline, especially for children. And Nike does the same sort of thing. Something about what Nike has done is that they connected to a lot of competitions, all sorts of sporting events, but they also connected to very low-level sporting events that we're all involved in, and got that brand into the identity of something like running, that we all thought of running as being the key thing that Nike produced from the 1970s onwards. So somehow this is making a value for the individual, and brand identity then, that brand management that I was talking about before, is a combination of using the consumer as a source of innovation. So this is where you feel the sense of how a lot of corporations have actually used black ghetto culture to produce a new version of itself. So it wasn't just Air Jordans in Nike. It was Air Jordans in combination with their value in black sort of basketball related culture that actually moved transnationally from there. So it's actually taking a bit of credibility that actually comes from a community itself. So again, a brand identity is a complex mix of consumer innovation and a brand conserving itself within that consumer innovation. So let's take a little bit more about this meaning of the brand. And these come from the kinds of ads that are produced by these companies. They're really clever in a lot of ways. These two ads that are in this one, this crisscrossing of the meaning of the brand, here is how Nike began to position itself in the 1970s, late 1970s. I think the one on the left is 1977, the one 1976, the one on the right is 1977. And what you have is that they're imagining this brand as not defined by the famous athlete, but defined by the loneliness of the runner, him or herself, and seeing that achievement is identical to the most famous people in any sport. And our identity then in this situation becomes so closely connected to Nike itself in that running idea that you're doing it for yourself, that brands are part of an identity construction that is both individual and in a sense collective, that you have a sense of commonality or a sense of collegiality amongst others who are doing similar things, running, on a bridge, or eventually Nike does something with a 76-year-old guy who has been running for 50 years and sets up an ad series like that. Now they move a little bit more with this meaning of the brand. And you can see this is one of the most intertextual constructions of a brand. And this is from about 1978. And you might recognize this person. He's probably much more central to my growing up than yours. That's John McEnroe, who's the bad boy of tennis and in the 1970s and 80s and a little bit into the 90s. He's still a commentator now. But you can see that they have blended this entirely with the James Dean notion of rebel without a cause, is the name of the movie from the 1950s. And they put McEnroe into the New York setting completely. And by doing that, they're investing the brand, the individual, and how we identify ourselves as something that's outside of corporate culture, that this is embodying something that can be outside of corporate culture, but using an incredible brand like Nike as if you are using it to define your difference, your identity, your distinctiveness in the world. And through McEnroe, the bad boy of tennis, this is blended together. So what I want you to do this week is try to work through all these variations of what's going on in Nike. There are about 25 ads, mainly video commercials, that you can look through and see what Nike has done in terms of constructing a meaning for the individual and a sense of a kind of surplus value produced by making a community that's connected to the brand itself and doing this community right across the world. That's it for this week. I hope to see you on the discussion boards.